a lot of people who have a lot of experience. So we went through the whole 10 years plus. I won't say how long I've been in the industry, but a long time. Some people with about the 5-year entry. One of the questions from this morning that really intrigued me was the question about, can you tell us about the latest incidents, right? And, we used to have the sort of DHS sort of threat report, I guess, or incident update. Okay. So the question I would ask you guys right off the bat is, how many of you feel that you need more information about what's going on incident-wise to convince your management to invest in ICS security? One, two, a few, all more hands. So how many, then the rest of you all feel that you have enough information on, the threat, what I'll just sort of generalize as the threat landscape?
I want to say something.
Excellent. My first question.
No, I just want to make a comment that, it's like saying that I want to know about all the accidents that happen in car crashes before I decide to wear a seatbelt. It's ridiculous. You have to have security.
It is. There's some analogies there with seatbelts and that, right? And I see, we see the evolving of regulation in this space, in the information security space anyway, like the NIS directive in the EU. I think, unfortunately, in the global landscape, the U.S. tends to be behind, I think, in information security regulation. That's a separate beer conversation we can have. So, I'm not a big predictions guy, right? But one of the things that I think you're going to see a lot more focus on in this area is the whole area of ransomware and the criminal element in critical infrastructure. I know that we've seen a lot of cases where even if you have sort of a commodity grade ransomware type of infection, as soon as the operators of that ransomware network find out that they're in a hospital or in a power installation, once they learn that, the ransom goes up significantly, right? So I don't think it'll take that long for criminals to actually figure out that those are the target-rich environments they want, right? They don't want to just lock up the pictures that are on grandma's computer, right? They can't get as much benefit out of that, right? The other thing that's disappointing to me, I guess, is that this space continues to be very much a target-rich environment. So, if you continue to look, and Eric doesn't like the word convergence, but if you look at the lack of proper segmentation, how about we talk about that, right? If you go almost to every single year that my former team, the ICS CERT, did kind of statistics of what they found when they went out and did assessments in the field, the top finding in almost every single year was lack of boundary protection, proper segmentation between the networks, right? So you have to understand what you have, and then you have to put the appropriate bits and pieces in place, right? So I think that we're going to see, a continuation of some of that, and it's not all, it's not all about the technology, right? You need to go out and actually do some of this boots on the ground discovery yourself. It isn't, you're not going to plug a magic box in that's going to map your whole network and tell you, here's the exact points you should put all of these demarcation devices or segmentation devices. It takes actual human thought to do that. Mr. Cosman.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. You're right.
Of course I'm right.
Of course, yes, I know. It goes without saying.
And
so why
humble,
did I say
and
it?
humble too.
But as a former process engineer, long ago, we all know that you can't secure it if you don't understand it.
Right.
So I just wanted to add emphasis to your point. It's not when you segment. People say segment your network. You're really not segmenting your network. You should be segmenting the process that's under consideration.
Absolutely.
And so that's why it's important to get that input as to how the process
similar in
works.
safety, and you don't like the word convergence, but you know,
Gonna
you
go down.
can't
That's
make
gonna become a meme if you're
you
not.
can't make safe what you don't know about, right? Which is why the whole voluntary reporting types of methodologies in safety where we report near misses, right? It's like, holy cow, this thing could have been a significant, event had we not contained it. So we actually celebrate those findings in the safety world, right? You have a near miss report, and then it gets kind of indoctrinated into everybody that, well, we shouldn't do this because it's wrong or it's bad. Go ahead.
So I'm Mike Brooks from Aspen Tech. I wanted to make a comment and ask a question. First of all, we're not in banking, we're not in retail, and if you are really running these processes, which is basically a controlled explosion, we understand risk, but we have not much need at all for a customer-facing exposure at all. For the most part, the people who need to be touching your stuff, you already know or ought to know. So my question is, what are we doing with things like whitelisting to whitelist the hardware and the software and the people we know to make sure that they are the only people who actually intrude into our networks?
Very broad set of questions there, I think. There definitely are solid whitelisting, application-specific whitelisting products and technologies on the market. I would say that in looking at the efficacy of some of those, you see in some vendor solutions that entire subdirectories are excluded from that just because that's the way that the products work, right? I think some of the newer products are becoming more specific about what applications or what processes in the system can be used. When you talk about people, you talk about remote access and you talk about vendor access and things like that. That's a huge weak spot, right? I remember a case from the old days where we were getting calls in a specific region of commodity malware infection. I think it was something like Conficur, right? And you could probably almost put pins on a map to show where the service tech drove their truck to plug into the PLCs, because every system that they touched got infected. And it was because their service laptop was infected and they were just spreading this, right? So do you in your plants have a mechanism in place to, check in and check out not only the people, but all the equipment they bring? Or better yet, do you supply them with your own corporately managed, inside your security perimeter policy machine with their software on it and say, here, you can use this while you're here, but then you give it back to me, right? So yes, there are some methodologies. I think we're behind in implementing some of those policies, right? So that leads me down to kind of the next question for me, or the next area is, we've got a ton of ICS-specific technology solutions available now, right? I mean, when I stood up here 10 to 15 years ago, we were always lamenting that, oh, well, there's no ICS-specific, firewalls, and then, buyers and company come out with Tofinos, and we see that proliferation. Or we don't see any specific detection technology available that recognizes ICS protocols. And I can't even count now how many companies are doing, ICS anomaly detection, or they're doing deep packet inspection of ICS protocols, right? So I think it's time as an industry to stop lamenting, right? Because we actually do have a pretty solid suite of ICS-specific cybersecurity tools. Now, Eric kind of pointed it out briefly, but the bad part about that is that you've got so much hype, right? This is a marketing-rich environment. You've got a lot of companies that are doing very competitive type of solutions in a young startup space, right? So they're all battling it out. And, I find, I'm an automation guy, right? I'm a control system engineering guy. That's where I came from. I would have a hard time racking and stacking what technology to actually deploy. You'd have to do a ton of pilots, you'd have to do a ton of partners to test them all out in your environment and kind of do that yourself, right? Which leads me back to the same statement as before. It's about people, right? You need to have the people that can do that selection process, do that measurement process, and figure out what solution is right for you. You're holding the mic like you have a question.
No,
Do you have a question?
No, I'm sorry. No,
There's a, at the back there, Eric.
Hey, good morning. This is Michiel Thijsling, Dow Chemical. I understand that we have plenty of solutions and opportunities to implement, etc. But we're all human, right? Means that we're geared for stories, and that's the reason why I think those cases like Triton, etc., should get a lot more publicity, because it will help us to understand not just the risk, but also help us to basically indoctrinate people. Why do we need to do this? And I really, if you look at the work floor, I miss that type of opportunity, that type of solution. If you look at operators, if you look at service people, etc., they all know, hey, this wide range of opportunities, but what you really want is the story behind it, so it makes it very real what you can do and why you need to do that.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's a big opportunity here for you to tell more of those stories to get all of us kind of geared up in that area.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, case studies, right? So where you take something that really happened and then get some group of expertise together to go through and analyze, well, how could we stop that thing, right? So, I mean, if you look at the Triton implementation, I think most people would tell you that there was a significant lack of segmentation between the basic process control system and the safety instrument system. And if you can enforce that segmentation, you've got a good chance, right? But that being said, air gaps don't stop everything, right? I mean, Stuxnet is probably the best example of that. If people want to get into your network, they will buy your people, their insider threats, right? So different set of solutions to do the analysis or monitoring of those areas. Question?
Yeah, to some extent, we talk about ICS security, cybersecurity. It's almost like a silo. And Eric brought up a great point in his bullet points there about securing blended IT, OT, and OT systems, which would seem to imply cross-industry standards, very cooperative throughout IT and OT, however terms you want to pin on that, and organizational changes. Do you have a comment on that, or anybody?
Yeah, and I think that leads down my next kind of discussion area, which was around standards, right? Standards and certifications. So in the area of ISA 62443, for example, I mean, we see a lot of uptick or adoption of the device certification type of programs now. So, Andre can talk more about ISA Secure, but more and more vendors are actually getting their stuff certified to some type of device security standard. That's a good thing, right? Well, the flip side of that is if the standard's available and the testing regime is available to get the stuff tested and the vendors are actually stepping up and getting devices tested, why aren't end users requiring in their procurement specifications that stuff be tested? I think we're as culpable, and I include myself in the end user category because that's the space I came out of. I think we are the reason that we're not securing our systems, right? It's an end user problem now. It's no longer a vendor problem. It's no longer a technology problem. We're not demanding or putting enough of those requirements in place. Now, to talk about the kind of IT, OT, and can we get consistent standards, I won't name any names, but if you look at large automation vendors based out of Europe, maybe in Germany, they made a statement that said they were going to start to use some of the elements of 62443 to secure their IT systems because it was better than what they had on that side.
But then again, they're not, that's still the ICS silo, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that when you've got a standard that is being applied to both of those, you're starting to break those barriers down. But yeah, there is still an element of that siloing, and I think there's an element of the us versus them, and the engineer versus the IT person. But I see more companies now, especially at the SOC layer, building converged SOCs than we used to. I mean, almost, ISA runs the Logic Consortium for the oil and gas industry and the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, every time we go into one of their installations, it's a converged environment. There's people looking at the entire spectrum of their networks, right?
Just a couple of comments. This has been a great discussion this last few minutes. It brings up what may be, well, will be at least one of those shameless plugs for the standards again, and maybe even another one. The first one, it had to do with, you were talking about I'll call it the complementary relationship between I'm going to call it business system security and operations security. The standards, the 62443 standards, are specifically designed to complement and not provide alternatives to those. So we made this a very definite decision not to duplicate information that's already out there. So
Yeah.
I think that's an important point for people to understand. And there was another one, and it's just escaping me at the moment, so I'll pass.
Well, and I think another great example of the uptick or the adoption of some of these standards is look at the press release that came out of the UN just recently, right? The UN has said that they are going to use 62443 in their new critical infrastructure protection framework, right? So when they start building the policy around that, they are recognizing the work that all of the men and the women in this room did in the ISA 99 and 62443 committees. And I think that's fantastic. The one area though, and Doug showed some data this morning that shows the progression of or increasing in numbers through the SANS training courses, right? And ISA sees the same thing. Our 62443 based security courses are very popular and they're increasing in popularity. But I don't think we're using certification enough in this particular space. If you look in the general IT business world, if you don't have CISSP or some letters after your name, you don't even get through the first stage of recruitment, right? I don't see that many job descriptions or job postings in the control system security space, OT security space, that say requires, ISA 62443 certification or requires, the SANS ICS certifications. I don't see that as much. So I think there's another gap or another opportunity for us. If you're a hiring manager and you're looking through, your potential job descriptions, start to include that, right? And you're going to get a baseline level of people that have gone through these programs.
That leads to a really interesting question for the audience, and I'll bring it over in just a second. And that is, do you hire people into these roles? Do you post jobs that say, we need somebody that's going to be our industrial cybersecurity expert or guru? Or do you build them internally, or do you assemble it from a team? I mean, this is a rhetorical question, but if you have comments on that, I'd be interested in hearing your feedback.
I'd love to see a show of hands. How many people try to hire that skill into their company? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many build those people internally? Yeah, overwhelming majority, right? Try to build it rather than to hire it. And I think that points back to my comment about we're not putting those baseline functional, requirements in there. Sir.
Yes, so I have the privilege of having both IT and OT a background on this conversation about certification. Where do the process control engineers stand with their hiring on certifications? Are they hiring SIM analysts or SIM engineers? Are they hiring forensics? I think the people that are writing those job specifications are engineers and not really looking at saying we got to fill our OT groups with that skill set, or are we just promoting engineers, young engineers, and throwing them into an ISA cybersecurity course and say, okay, you're going to run everything as far as cybersecurity prevention and mitigation.
Yeah, so sort of self-fulfilling prophecy kind of conversation, right? If the engineers are writing the job descriptions and not including the cybersecurity pieces in it, then that's what you'll get at the end of the day. Yeah, I believe that. And then the last thing before I turn it over to the rest of the panel is I'm pleased actually to see, and I'm going to use the word convergence again, but I'm pleased to see us starting to adopt functional safety methodologies in evaluating cybersecurity risk. So what do I mean by that? I come out of pulp and paper, which is primarily a chemical industry, right? And we had a lot of things that would go boom if you didn't treat them right, process safety management type of implementations. And, we've got very rigorous functional safety methods to evaluate the safety of stuff, whether that's a HAZOP or a PHA, process hazard analysis type of situation, right? You go through and ask, well, what can happen if an operator accidentally opens this valve instead of closes it and then moves on to the next step in the process? We see companies now, and I won't again name any names, but we see functional safety companies now in their tools, in their software tools, and in their methods, adding cyber PHAs and cyber risk analysis into that. So they ask, can any part of this function be hacked, right? Or can a logic solver, is a logic solver part of this, and can it be manipulated? And I think that's a highly positive trend, right? I think we've been preaching that for the last 10 to 15 years. You have to ask those questions when you're sitting in that room doing that HAZOP. Sir, Mike right there.
Hi, Michael Seal from MIT. Just a question about that. Have you seen a lot of engineering redesign as a result of that? So, we design key systems or crown jewels around certain sensors that had to do with engineering principles and things going wrong as a result of engineering principles. Now we have cyber principles, which are completely different. It's, one way it's by chance or by failure, accidental failure or whatever. And the other way it's you're attacked. So that's clear to everybody. Are you seeing a redesign where you say, okay, that's an important piece of equipment. We used to have just limits of, speed, but now we need something to measure whether it's vibrating or something to determine its temperature, because if it were to be something attacked differently, no longer would the principles of how it would fail hold up. Are you seeing that type of redesign?
Yes, but not enough, I think is probably my own personal perspective. So I've been on the speaking circuit for probably the last couple years talking about a concept that Idaho National Lab's been promoting, which is consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering, right? And basically what it means is when you're engineering the safety envelope of a new installation or evaluating a brown site, you go in with that attacking mindset going that can an informed adversary manipulate this? And if the answer is yes, then you have to put in some non-cyber type of control in there to mitigate that. And, one of the problems I think we had coming out of the gate with that is the first media article was something like the dumbing down of the smart grid, right? They thought, oh, Marty and his gang of fools are trying to promote that we go to hardwired relay logic or something, and we can't do that anymore. Some of these processes are so complex that we need to have the intelligence of a modern logic solver. So, but we are fairly smart as human beings, right? So we could build a purpose-built logic solver that was in an encapsulated, tamper-proof box that was not reprogrammable or reflashable, and that basically if you built it wrong or you need to change the way it works, you got to throw it away. You got to build a new one. That might cost a lot of money, but if it prevents a catastrophe like Bhopal or something like that, then it's worth it. So yes, we are starting to see that, but I don't think the uptick is quite enough. I think you're going to see more of that, hopefully, as people start to digest, Triton Trisis. I mean, that was a way wicked close near miss, right? In the cyber world, right? So we better figure out how to make these things non-cyber. And then I'm going to let you guys, Andre, is it you next? So we'll turn it over to Andre from ISA Secure, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks, Marty. And while we're making that transition, just maybe a quick couple comments. This this question of designed in and considering security or compromises to security as part of the design process, we are seeing, I mean, I think we, when I say we now, the industry is seeing more emphasis on that. We're seeing the disciplines come together, the safety engineering disciplines and the security people come together. One thing I will let you know, Marty referred to colloquially called cyber PHAs, cyber process hazard analysis. ISA will soon be publishing a book written by two experts in this field from one of those companies that he talked to. And again, I'm not going to mention names, but the whole thesis of this book is converging safety and cybersecurity into a common threat analysis and a hazard analysis. And in this particular case, the authors have chosen, rather than to keep that secret sauce inside their company and sell it as a service, to publish it as a book and give it to the industry. So I know this because I was one of the reviewers of the book, and I don't know exactly where it stands in the publication process, but it will be coming out. So
And a training course to accompany that. So.
yeah.
So you're not going to stand up? No. You have to stand up.
Hello. Apparently, if you start speaking, it'll. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I thought, yeah, we're a panel discussion, so I'm going to stay on the panel. So, I'm Andre Restaino. I'm the managing director of the Automation Standards Compliance Institute at ISA. So I run two conformity assessment programs. One's with ISA 100 Wireless. So we're like the Wi-Fi Alliance for industrial wireless. We built the implementation specs and the test kits to test ISA 100 wireless stacks and devices. I also run the ISA Secure, it's ISA IEC 62443 conformity assessment program. It operates as a consortium. It was founded in 2007 by a group of thought leaders from the oil and gas industry and tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. I have the privilege to say that my colleague here, Johan, and I was the board chairman on multiple occasions and did a nice job leading us to build a program that has become a model for the rest of the world. I'll give a little update on where things are at there, and then a couple things that have happened in the industry that I think are relevant, and then finish up with a thought that I have on cybersecurity. So again, today, the Security Compliance Institute has a chairman, Kenny Mesker from Chevron, vice chairman, James Hobbs from ExxonMobil. And so, we do run a conformity assessment program, certifications, but there's a whole lot more that we can do and that we strive to do to be relevant and provide for the industry. So, for example, if you think about the standards development process, it's open consensus. Anybody can get a seat at the table and contribute. Once the standards are published, they go on the shelf. Then what? If you're an industry, where's your forum? Where's your voice for the implementation of those standards? And so that's what we provided initially in traditional process industries. So we take the standards, develop certification requirements and specifications, and they meet the needs and of the asset owners who have to live with these things. So what we tried to mitigate was, if you think about the SIL standards, 61508 and 61511, they were published in each of the certification bodies, whether it's to Ryland, to SUD, go down the whole list of all the certification labs. They each wrote their own set of specifications and certified the safety products. And so then there was a shakeout period where asset owners would look at the certifications and see which ones were for real and which ones were rubber stamps, and that created some inefficiencies in the industry. So the way we're operating is we have one set of well-engineered specs, and we recruit labs into our program. So we'll have many, many labs that are all using the same set of specs. If we find things that need to be changed, updated, improved,
There's a forum for circling that back if we find issues with the standards themselves. We have a liaison through board level position. Actually, Eric's on that position now, back to the ISA 99 committee, and we can feed back any improvements or fixes to the actual standards. So early on, we were certifying ahead of the publication of the standards. More recently, the relevant standards were published. That's accelerated the numbers of certs. We were doing maybe 1 or 2 a year. Last year, 2018, we did 14 device certifications and recertifications. We also certify development processes for the supplier organization. So Emerson had 2 of their sites certified for the 62443-4-1 standard. It's important to include end users in the processes. This is our focus. So last year, we added a number of supporters. YPF, it's a large energy company in Argentina. Shell joined. There's a major, really big oil company in the Mideast that we'll announce. Small company from China, and Johnson Controls, which is known for building management systems. So they're a supplier. So we have 6 recognized test tools, CRT test tools. We added 1 more in 2018. I don't think we'll be adding any more, and you can ask a question about that later for a rationale on that, but I think we have more than enough for now. Our certification labs, they're all independently accredited by ISO IEC 17011 accreditation bodies. So we've established MOUs with DAX in Germany, ANSI A&B in North America, Japan Accreditation Board in Japan, the Singapore Accreditation Council, and in March I'm signing an agreement with the Dutch Accreditation Council. Now these accrediting bodies, they accredit the certification labs, the certification bodies, and we're adding them as well. And so that's important from the perspective of globalizing the certification. It helps out the suppliers when they get certified, whether it's in the US or Japan. The certification marks recognized globally. So the intent is to make it economically efficient for suppliers, so they only have to do this once. There's a tendency for geographies and governments to want to stand up their own certifications, and I'm actually working with several organizations on that to try to ensure that they're harmonized. But so today, in terms of certification bodies, we have Exida. They've done more SIL certifications than any other certification body. TUV Rhineland, CSSC in Japan. CSA Group is coming on board as a certification body. TUV Sud in Singapore, and DNV GL in Singapore. They have a big footprint in maritime. So last year there was 2 key standards that were published: the 62443-4-1. Eric mentioned that, and 62443, the component level security capability requirement standard. And so we did updates to our certifications to fully align with 62443. So today all our certifications are fully aligned, and that's what we're certifying to. So Marty mentioned this announcement about the UN Commission to integrate ISA IEC 62443 into it's actually the EU regulatory framework. And so that's significant, and it's a start. So other things that we're doing to stay relevant, we're collaborating with the Open Process Automation Forum. They've asked us if we could look at their security requirements, which are based on 62443, and they've developed certification profiles, and they've asked us to review them and see if they could be implemented using our program. So we're in that process now. 2 years ago,
we did a study for building management systems to bring subject matter experts in from that group and confirm that 62443 was relevant for building management systems and that ISA Secure could be used. This year, and we published a report, it's available for free download on our website. This year we resurrected that committee and we're pursuing the building management industry vertical. And as a result of that, we ran into some folks at the DOD that were looking for having federal facilities and DOD facilities and all the products certified, but they didn't want to be in the certification business, so they asked the industry to set up a certification program. And so we're starting meetings on that in a few weeks. We also partner with, not partner with, but we communicate with Logic. We get briefings from the Logic group, and it helps us, helps provide input into what we should be looking at from a certification perspective. And we provide feedback to them about where our program status is. I was part of a group in the EU, ERNCIP. They're kind of like a NIST organization. They did a study a couple of years ago to set up a conformity assessment program in the EU. They rendered a report, and now they're resurrecting the committee to follow up on that, and I've been invited back to provide input there. That's important because it gives me a platform for encouraging alignment and harmonization between that program and others like ours. So, excuse me. So I'll end with my statement. I think cybersecurity is a dimension of product quality. And why would you buy a product with a known defect?
Thank you, Andre. And thanks to Andre. He's getting over, I think, a rather nasty cold, so we appreciate his straining his voice as he's in a recovery stage. I've got a quick program announcement to make. I'll insert it here since I have the mic. The ARC has reprinted badges, if you're interested, with your company affiliation in a larger font so people can recognize it. So if you want to pick up a revised badge, you can do that at the registration desk. A couple of comments on Andre's points. Some of you may have, if you've heard me speak before, you might have heard me use the phrase, standards were never written to be read by civilians. And what I mean by that is that standards can be pretty arcane. And just answering somebody's query about what do I do about any subject, whether it's safety or cybersecurity or anything else, and say, well, here's the 2,000 pages of standards, is not really helpful. So we're seeing this discipline, this area now move into practices and certification and case studies. You've heard all these phrases used, and that's a sign of maturity, in my opinion. And I think that's something that the industry sorely needs. And for example, just to give you one example, one of the new, and this sounds like a contradiction, but bear with me, one of the new documents in the 62443 series that we have a work group actively developing right now is case studies and use cases. And rather than being detached case studies and use cases, it's going to be specifically organized to accentuate and illustrate particular fundamental concepts in the standards. So you can see the concepts in context. So if you're interested in that, let me know. I can give you more information, or if you're interested in contributing those use cases, because obviously they need to be relevant to what the real world is doing, we'd love to hear from you. And then, so, that's a sign of the standards development sort of, again, getting more mature. The last point I want to make, and Andre touched on this briefly, is he mentioned about building automation. We're seeing adoption of practices, I won't even use the term standards, but the practices in industrial automation security being of interest to an adoption by other sectors. In addition to building automation, we've seen it in rail transportation, and we are seeing it now in, of all places, medical systems. Complex medical systems and healthcare facilities have a lot in common with complex industrial control systems. So there's a very strong interest in adopting these principles in that space, and then that is also a good thing. Earlier this morning, somebody mentioned we don't need to develop more standards. Don't think of that as being limited within a particular sector. So with that, I'll turn it over to Johan, who's going to give his thoughts on some of the culture. Oh, sorry, before we do that, well, Johan, step up, please, or if you want. You have a question.
Yeah, real quick. When you were speaking about the site certifications that you have performed, I would like to know what are the key areas that would determine how long would that certification will last? Are we talking, will the certification last a month, 2 months? What would be the input documentation that you would need from the end user? For example, would you need architecture drawings, topology drawings, an inventory of the IT assets? Would you ask them to, let me take a look at your domain group policies, how many users you have? And I would also like to ask you if, you know, the ICS as a living entity goes through multiple stages of changes. It's going through upgrades, expansions, decommissioning. How do these changes affect the certification of the ICS? If I replace a network switch that is from Cisco with another brand, does it affect the certification? So, or if anyone here has experience and got their site certified, could you tell us how long did it take you? How many people did you get involved?
Yeah, so
Andre?
Well,
Or anyone on the
there's
panel.
two parts answer to this. So Marty can talk about site certification for the ISA Secure program. We're certifying commercial off-the-shelf products. So we're not doing site certifications. We're on the front end of the system life cycle. We certify the development processes for those products. But in terms of site certifications, maybe Marty or Johan can address those better.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, I mean, the ISA Secure and other programs like it are primarily either certifying the actual device, so the PLC, the sensor from a given manufacturer, or certifying the software development lifecycle that the vendor goes through, right? So they're certifying that the vendor's using sound security policies in their development. Like, so do they have a way to submit vulnerabilities from the research crowd, like the whole Apple FaceTime thing that happened this last week, right? 14-year-old kid finds a huge glaring hole, and Apple didn't have a way to intake that vulnerability report because it wasn't from one of their developers, right? So they told the kid's mom, hey, you need to be an Apple developer to submit a vuln report. So they look at how do the vendors do that. And when you talk about site certification, I'm not actually sure I've heard of people using a term like, we'll come and certify that your site is secure, because there's so many moving parts, right? I know there are a lot of the big consulting firms around the world that will come in and help you do a risk assessment of your given installation or multiple installations, and then based on your company's risk tolerance, right, or risk appetite, will give you some guidance about where to invest or where to prioritize. But I mean, all the things that you talked about certainly do impact how long those last. And I don't, in the system certification area, how long does a cert for a vendor site last from ISA Secure? So if you go certify vendor X, this site is good. Is that a 2-year thing or?
Site, the product.
Site.
So we don't do site certification. Supplier site.
Supplier site.
Yeah, so we do an audit, and they're looked at every 3 years to confirm their processes are good. We recently updated our approach for certifying products. So now the recognition is that the security development lifecycle is key to ensuring products remain secure over their lifetime. So we do the normal assessments, testing, and then security lifecycle to confirm that it's being used for the product. And then we come back every 3 years if there's no change to the product version. If there's a major version update, not bug patches, there'll be a reassessment. But other than that, it's just assumed that if the processes are intact and they're being followed, that the product's getting better, not worse.
Yeah, and I think it's similar for you know, a sort of a end user site. So I really hesitate to use the term certification, but if you've engaged in a process, it depends on how fast you're turning over certain things, right? So if you're doing a ton of commissioning of new areas and systems, and there's new network devices popping up all the time, then you better have some pretty good procedures in place to evaluate the health of your asset inventories and things like that. But if you're in a stable environment that those kinds of changes aren't happening all the time, maybe you can go longer between those evaluations, right?
If we need to give Johan his time, but I think if I were to take your question and turn it around a little bit and change the term, I think you're right. Rather than use the word certification, use assessment. And I would turn it around to the audience and ask you an open-ended question. How many people here have had third-party assessments of your environment? And do you have a program for doing that on an ongoing basis? And is it a once and done, or you plan to have it every 3 years or every 5 years? Because as Marty points out, it reflects somewhat the dynamic nature of your system, how dynamic it is. And some of that dynamic nature is not in your control. If you think of risk of being the product of threat, vulnerability, and consequence, okay, maybe you have some control over consequence because you're not redesigning your process. Maybe you have some control over vulnerability because you know what you're installing and when you're installing it. But you have no control over the threats. So external threats might force you to reassess. So just keep that in mind. And by the way, the open-ended question, I think I got about 8 or 10 people put their hands up that they have these third-party assessments. And there are lots of companies out there that will do them for you and give you a fairly detailed report. So Johan, turn it back to you.
Hi, my name is Johan Nine.
It'll come on, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
This one's working. Hello? Hello.
Yeah, there it is. Oh, okay. We'll just switch them.
My name's Johan Nye. A little bit about myself. I always like to understand the context of the speaker. So I recently retired after 38 years from a major oil company. My entire career was in the ICS discipline. So I learned, I've been through about 4 generations, depending on how you're counting, of industrial control systems. And when the industry moved to Windows and TCP/IP networking, I realized, hey, security is going to start to be a very big thing. So I learned by myself, the IT side of things. I ended my career as ICS Cybersecurity advisor. I used to say my job description was I build and sustain security culture. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a few minutes about culture. Culture, I find, is something that's not talked about enough, but it is the top level objective, I think, for many companies. I'm currently co-chairman of the ISA 99 Working Group 4. This is the group that does all the technical requirements. There's 4 of the standards of the entire suite are in my purview. And as Andre mentioned, I've been previously the chair of the ISA Security Compliance Institute. So my context, industrial control systems, end user, petrochemical industry. When Eric invited me to attend, and he said, well, we're talking about trends in cybersecurity, I decided, well, I'm now retired, I have a little more time to look at things, so let me take a step back and look at, kind of where we are big picture. And so first thing I did was have a look at cyber incidents, and I found a site, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, csis.org. Go have a look there. They keep an updated list of all of the major cybersecurity incidents that have happened. It's quite interesting. And this is both IT, industrial, the whole works. And from 2008 to 2014, they were averaging about 25 a year. 2016, 2017, 2018, sharp uptick in the number of incidents. So in 2018, there were 103 incidents. So at least on incidents, the trend is going the wrong direction, right? It's sharply increased. About 8% of those incidents had a physical, actual or potential physical consequences. I was somewhat liberal with physical. I included drones and things like that in the physical, so it wasn't all industrial, and that was pretty consistent year over year, that 8%. The most significant incident of the last couple of years, of course, is the Triton incident, and for me, that's the most significant thing to happen in the ICS world, cybersecurity related, since Stuxnet. The reason why, so Doug showed a nice slide before that talked about loss of view and loss of control. But there was one thing that was missing, very important. The third element is loss of protection, right? And so this was a case where the attacker had access to the safety instrumented system, was able to do what we call in the safety world a covert failure. It happened to be overt just because the attacker messed up. But he was going for covert failure of the safety system. So if a process demand had come along, guess what? There's likely could be a safety incident. And also, guess what? It was in the DCS system as well. So he could drive that process incident to create the safety incident. So this, to me, is a huge wake-up call for everyone. And if you're an end user and you haven't already validated that all of your safety systems are secure, you need to run and go out and start that process right now. Validate that. I won't be sad or disappointed if you leave the meeting right now and go start that activity. Because to me, that's securing your protective systems is a top priority item for all of the end users. On vulnerabilities, the National Vulnerability Database is a great resource to do research on vulnerabilities. If you look 2009 through 2017, they'd average about 1,000 new vulnerabilities, new entries per month. All of a sudden in 2018, that's gone up to about 3,800 new vulnerabilities. And in some months, it peaked up to like 9,000 new vulnerabilities per month. Not quite sure what's going on there, but certainly, again, an uptick in vulnerabilities. Had a look at the ICS CERT advisories list. And again, their 2010 through 2015 averaged around 76 events per year, advisories per year. 2018, 222. So another pretty sharp uptick.
Anybody discouraged yet?
Well, the vulnerabilities, for me, I take that as both bad news and good news.
Yep.
So the bad news is there's still a lot of vulnerabilities in the systems and products that we have. The good news is it seems like there's a fairly robust vulnerability disclosure and repair process.
Yep.
So that's, to me, is good news. And overall, I have to say, looking back 10 or 15 years, I'm encouraged by the products, particularly from the major suppliers that the current generation has considered and designed in cybersecurity. And I'm also encouraged that there's products out there in the last couple of years that are cybersecurity related products, but they're specifically targeted for the industrial space. That's something new in the last couple of years, and that looks encouraging. Another trend, the industry standards are maturing. Andre talked about that quite a bit. There's two that are of note for me. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework. I like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework because it's both simple to understand, but it has a lot of depth. And I think NIST really did an awesome job, collaborating comments from thousands of inputs. Full disclosure, I represented Automation Federation on that activity. It's a really good piece of work, and it's a good, solid framework for many companies to use to develop your cybersecurity program. And Andre talked quite a bit about 62443, so I won't. So now talk about culture. So for me, it's a top-level goal that you have a security culture in your company. And this is more than just the people, process, technology that we all talk about. A culture. What is a culture? It's, if you look at the Merriam-Webster, it's a set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterizes an organization. So many of us are familiar with another kind of culture, which is a safety culture. You've done this before. You need to apply those same learnings to building a security culture. Okay? There's many similarities with a safety culture, but you're really, the top level, methodology for that is, if I go back to the Deepwater Horizon event, there was congressional testimony given by Rex Tillerson around safety culture. And I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit, but he said, leadership drives culture and culture drives behavior. So at the end of the day, if you want to drive secure behaviors, it requires leadership and it requires a culture. Strategy alone, policy alone is not going to achieve that objective. It's not going to drive that behavior. And so that's why I think it's important to do that. And one of the studies that I read had a term in there that I thought was pretty cool. What you want to build is that your employees become human firewalls. I thought that was a pretty cool way of thinking about what is the objective? Because the reality is it just takes one employee, one phishing email for an attacker to gain a foothold in your organization. And from there, they pivot to many other places. The goal, it's very hard. It's a difficult thing to do, to get every employee on board with having a security culture. So hopefully we'll get a few questions about that. I can give my insights in how to do that. That's kind of what I wanted to
Just a couple of
lead off
comments
with.
in support of what you just said. You quoted Rex Tillerson, or paraphrased Rex Tillerson. There's another famous quote from a famous CEO that said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." So if you can solve the culture thing, you got a tremendous tool in your quiver, right? And get the culture. But I have a question for you, Johan, just for my personal, I have my views on this, but I'd appreciate hearing yours. When you compare the safety and the security culture, or the need for a culture in both of those spaces, the safety culture, to some extent, you can make the argument that it's motivated by enlightened self-interest. People don't want to get hurt. They want to go home the same way that they came to work in the morning. So they have skin in the game. How do you address the equivalent of that in the security space? I didn't want to put you on the spot.
No, it's, I think people, they still have skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to be the person that introduced a virus into their organization.
Right.
No one wants to be the person that was the the one that clicked the phishing email that caused, you know, a ransomware attack, you know, across the corporation. So I think it's the same kind of thing, yeah.
And maybe that's the way to get the skin in the game, because I've heard, I'll make this my own observation. I've heard people say, well, security's not my problem, it's the company's problem. It's their assets, their information, that's, you know, what can I do, right? But the way to get people's skin in the game, I'll tell you a little story. Years and years ago, many, many years ago, I worked for a guy, and back then there was a big focus on cost control, and a particular area was people using telephones for personal long-distance calls. And an edict went out to all managers and said, you need to police your people and make sure that they don't do that. And Pete, my friend Pete, who was in charge of a particular unit, he says, no problem, I know how to do that. And what he did was, they'd send him a report every month of the long-distance phone calls, and he would just walk out to the control room and pin it on a bulletin board. To your point,
Yeah.
no one wants to be the source of.
Well, the
right?
very first thing in building a culture has to be the recognition that every employee has a role to play.
Yep.
Now, the amount of knowledge that you'll need for cybersecurity is different depending on what your role is. If your role is just, you know, employee does email, it's about phishing attacks and those sorts of things. If you're the administrator of a industrial control system, you need to have a much higher level of knowledge about, but you need to combat that thought that, oh, cybersecurity is someone else's problem. It's not my problem. That's the very thing, and that's the kind of the core to having a cybersecurity culture. Yes.
I just have a very quick comment.
So what do you want to do? Take it off.
With many firms with regard to cybersecurity, I remember working with a very large financial firm that did in-house phishing tests. And they sent out a phishing test, and maybe you've had similar things in your organization, that said, this is a phishing email. If you click on the link, it will harm your computer. And people still clicked on it. So I do have to say, it's a very different, we are scientists. The narrative we have underneath is, oh, they asked why did you click on it? I wanted to see what would happen. So there's a very different there's a cultural disconnect between people who understand that if you turn a valve that says danger, something will happen disastrously, to someone who will click on a computer who might want to run an experiment. And I think
But I would say that that's a failure of awareness. People don't have the proper cybersecurity awareness. They don't have a proper understanding of the consequences. That's why you get that behavior. If you have the proper training and the proper awareness, then you send out that phishing email, and hopefully you'll get zero hits, because people now understand what are the consequences when I do that.
There's a lot of statistics. You all have them. I'm curious, is there any indication of the percent of incidents created by users and contractors internally versus coming in from external and electronic intrusion from outside the facility? Is there any discernment of that?
I didn't look for that when I was doing my homework, but I have seen you know, estimates of insider attacks that have been all over the map, quite frankly.
Yeah, I would say definitely yes, the statistics exist. I don't know if I feel confident enough in my memory to be able to quote them off the top of my head. But I know ICS CERT, and I know the major security and threat intel providers that make these kinds of reports. The Verizon data breach report, for example, is a great source of information every year. You know, and I think one of the issues we have in the operational technology space is the accidental infection rate, right? And that's sort of the commodity malware, low-hanging fruit. And I would state that that's pretty easy to fix, right? I mean, removable media controls coming in and out of your environments and things like that. I mean, you should be able to control that with a combination of policy and technology. Now, controlling an advanced nation state that wants to get into your system is a whole different level of maturity, right? But you should be able to prevent conf occur, from getting into your system.
Yeah, this is for anybody on the panel. When you start talking about applying safety culture to cyber culture, has there been any thought given into coming up with leading indicators for what might indicate some of the more severe events that could occur? Like certain types of attacks externally coming in from systems so that companies have an idea of how they may be exposed?
Yeah, one of the key elements to creating a security culture is to have a set of measures, a set of KPIs. Sometimes there are measures, sometimes there are metrics. It depends if you have a target value, you can establish a target value. But I have found that having good, so you need to tailor the measures to the behaviors that you want to drive in your organization. That's the key. That's the key, learning for me, because the measures, if you collect them, report them to senior management, they do drive behavior. Because there's no plant manager that wants to be on the bottom of the rank list when it gets reported up. So it drives behavior. And so if your desire is to have computers that are on supported operating systems, that's your measure. If you want to drive a behavior that is, I want to increase the patching, percentage in my organization, that's your measure. So start building your measures from what are the desired behaviors that I want to have in my cybersecurity culture.
Yeah, I think we've all heard the phrase, you get what you measure. So that's an important one. I'm going to make one plea here real quick before I pass it over. Again, going back to the committee, our committee, we had an effort in the committee that has been suspended to develop, in the context of the standards, metrics for assessing effective cybersecurity response. We suspended it because it didn't seem to be making a lot of progress. So I'm going to put a plea out to the audience. If you have an interest in this area, or if you have relevant experiences in this area and want to contribute, please consider doing so, and we would love to reactivate that work group. So, Don.
Guys, maybe this is a bit new business for the panel's discussion, but we've talked a lot about organizational maturity and product certification and culture. But what should we be asking for or advocating to address the threat actors themselves? What are we working to develop consensus on regulation and enforcement types of actions? What should we be asking for and working to address the threat actors themselves, not the defensive measures we've been talking about? And I'm just curious on what the panel's opinions are on that question.
Yeah. So one of the, obviously, there's laws that cover criminal behavior, right? But other than that, an end user really has little control over the actors themselves. But if you look at the standards and practices, the 62443, there's two large elements to that. One is your security zone modeling, right? You're breaking up your system into smaller pieces. And then performing threat modeling on that so that you understand what the attack vectors are, and then build mitigations against those attack vectors.
Yeah, interesting question, right? And we're probably in the wrong conference to have a in-depth discussion about cyber war policy adoption across many different nations. But I would say from my government work, in the criminal area, there certainly is a huge amount of collaboration between national level, state level, law enforcement agencies, for example. I would say that we're still fairly young in the discussion of how to handle that at the nation state level, so the non-criminal, the espionage, et cetera. But you do see sanctions, demarches. There are policies or procedures in place that countries can, slap another country on the wrist, right? But I think it lends itself to another discussion about information sharing. As an end user community or as a vendor community in the automation space here, you need to share what's important to you with your relevant government partners so that when they go to those meetings, so when the FBI is trying to shut down some sort of botnet or something in a different country, that they have relevant information on what's important to you as a company in this country or in your country of origin, right? So I would think that there's an opportunity for us to help our government leaders get better at pursuing those threat actors in the different categories based on what kind of information they have available to them.
Okay, we're almost out of time. We got time for one more question. Anyone have a question?
No, everybody's hungry.
Yeah, everybody's hungry. Okay, so if no question, I'll leave you with a comment. Since we're on this theme about enforcement and so forth, you go to some of the security conferences. I've been there. I know Marty's been there. Some of these conferences that are specific security related, and you get an interesting and eclectic group of people that have words like enforcement and officer and agent and stuff like that in their job titles. So you either feel slightly paranoid or very protected. I remember being at one when I was sitting at a table with federal agents and law enforcement officers, and I felt really safe.
Yeah, everybody's armed on this panel.
Yeah, exactly. So with that, I thank you very much for the workshop and your participation. Please, I hope you got something out of it, and attend the rest of or many more of the sessions in this track through the rest of the week or into Thursday. And with that, I want to thank the panelists for keeping us engaged. And we'll be seeing you around. And since Sid said this, I have another session that I'm chairing on Wednesday afternoon at 2:30. So look that up in the program. Thanks.